Let's turn our attention now to language development and how it actually proceeds. Um, our capacity for developing language and that we see in humans is just downright remarkable in a lot of ways. Um, if you wanted to guess, for example, how many words you learned during the years between your first birthday and high school graduation, um, although generally you'll use about 150 words for about half of what you say, you will probably have learned up to 60,000 different words in your native language during those years. And as with each step into education, that number goes even higher as we go along. So now, ultimately, our facility for developing language is just downright remarkable. And we not only develop language, but we also develop innuendos and subtleties in language as well. So essentially, language development moves from the simple to the complex, and that's what's interesting about that is that just as our physical development proceeds that way from the simple to the complex, so does language as well. So we always start with, and what we see most readily is receptive language, and as the name suggests, little ones can have a receptive language that's actually quite large. They begin to develop an understanding of a variety of words relatively early on. So they understand something, but they can't communicate. So they haven't developed the second component of language, and that is productive language itself. So receptive language is what they understand. What they can actually produce in language is the other component part of this, and that's two major components to pay attention to, is receptive language and productive language. Now, productive language moves along at a pretty good clip. About 4 months of age, you will see what we refer to as the babbling stage, and usually it's a repetition of sounds themselves. Sometimes they are consonant vowel pairs like mama, dada, ta-ta, etc. And that's oftentimes easier. So they're consonant vowel pairs. And a lot of times the hard consonants are easier to pronounce, or actually harder to pronounce than the softer ones. So mama is a softer consonant, and that's oftentimes why little ones say that first than da-da. If you think about and notice the tongue movement that's required to produce a hard consonant like da or ka, usually it's the development of teeth and also the palate and understanding of palate that becomes part of that developmental piece to develop to be able to communicate that. But babbling is, in a sense, it's kind of a experimental point in time, and kids will begin to develop a tendency to repeat, and we call it perseveration. Along about 10 months of age, we go to 10 months. I have a dog that keeps coming and going, and I have to shut the door there. So at about 10 months, a lot of times we can identify the language of the household. So if it's a Hispanic-speaking household, we might actually pick up, so native language is detected in the babbling itself. If you have a trained ear for it, you'll probably pick it up, detected in babbling. at about 10 months of age. And then around the first birthday, 12 months, somewhere in that vicinity, we begin to see basically one word stage of development. And so kids will just say a single word, milk or dog. So we have one word stages. And that can stick around a long time, actually. It really depends on what the adults do. If the adults will contextualize and lengthen the word usage, then oftentimes little ones will mimic that. And so here, this is largely influenced by how adults interact. Because if adults settle for a single word as a means of communication, then they don't encourage the continued development in terms of word usage and so forth. So essentially a kid will say, cow, cow, and if the adult says, yeah, see the cow, or look at the cow, that's an expansion which helps the child develop a bigger vocabulary ultimately. I've seen too many adults that essentially do all the interpretation, and the child really never has to develop beyond the one word stage sometimes, although they still do. Somewhere around about the 18-month to 2 years, so 18 months to 24 months, is when we begin to see the two-word stage. And oftentimes this is referred to as telegraphic speech. I mean, if you think a stage arrives 2 p.m., period, or stop in telegraphic speech. And a lot of times our text messaging looks a little bit like telegraphic speech. It's just a two-word stage or two-word sentences that telegraphs, and you end up filling it in for the child itself. And this soon leads to essentially longer and longer phrases. There doesn't really seem to be a three-word stage. By early elementary school, it jumps from this two-word up to longer phrases and sentences itself, and so up to sentences. And partly because it's reinforcement, it's also just the contextual engagement by the adults in that whole thing that is important to understand in it. So you could apply some of the basic principles of learning when we talk about language in terms of what's reinforced and how that whole thing works together between the adults and the little ones that they have. Adults can really have a huge impact on the richness of a little person's language development, just simply by engaging them with longer and longer sentences. And even if they don't understand, they still are exposed to a rich vocabulary of language, which they will ultimately begin to pick up as time goes along.